Still waiting on some folks, but certainly hello, bienvenidos. Welcome to everyone to this year's Rita Cassela Jones Lecture, one of our signature events here at the Francis and Anne Curran Center for American Catholic Studies. My name is Michael Lee, and as director of the Curran Center, it really is a special privilege to be able to host this lecture. The Rita Cassela Jones Lecture turns 21 this year. And if 21 marks an important transition to adulthood in our society, then we can look back and marvel on the childhood and the adolescence of this lecture. Founded in honor of Rita Cassela Jones, through the generosity of her husband, Dr. Robert Jones, Professor Emeritus of History here at Fordham University, the lecture has served as a beacon of insight on the issues of women in the American Catholic community. And so I'd like to acknowledge the presence of a few members of the Jones family who are here with us tonight. Catherine, Ken, and Sophie, and Sam, welcome. You missed your parents. And I know there are a few more Joneses coming, but thank you for your presence here. And I also want to recognize my colleagues at the Curran Center for their help in this and our many efforts. Firstly, to our administrator, Maria Terzulli, who's, as always, floating around, working. We could never do what we do without her. And of course, my associate directors, Angela O'Donnell, John Sykes, and Michael Peppard, just an amazing team to work with. One of the distinctive characteristics of the Curran Center is that we not only host public events like this lecture, but we sponsor an undergraduate concentration in Catholic studies, an amazing cohort of students. So thanks to you, Catholic studies students who are here tonight. It's awesome to see you. We are thrilled to host Dr. Elizabeth O'Donnell Gandolfo, who is the early Associate Professor of Catholic and Latin American Studies and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the Wake Forest University School of Divinity. With a BA from St. Joe's University, an MTS from Notre Dame, and a Ph.D. from Emory, Dr. Gandolfo is a constructive theologian rooted in the Catholic tradition whose teaching and research place Christian theology in conversation with human responses to vulnerability, suffering, violence, and oppression, especially in context of social injustice and ecological degradation. She's the author, co-author, co-editor of multiple articles, books, and chapters. Just to note a few, her first books, The Power and Vulnerability of Love, a Theological Anthropology, and the co-edited Parenting as Spiritual Practice and Source for Theology, Mothering Matters, explore various issues of women's diverse experiences of maternity and natality. Recent years, Dr. Gandolfo has turned to decolonial studies as a critical dialogue with Christian theology. The co-authored book, Remembering the Reign of God, the Decolonial Witness of El Salvador's Church of the Poor, and her most recent book, Eco-Martyrdom in the Americas, Living and Dying for Our Common Home, respectively treat the ecclesial-based communities of El Salvador, with whom she worked for a couple of years, and highlight the ongoing threats to environmental defenders, and theologically engages their witness in light of recent developments in Catholic social thought and liberation theology. With a lecture entitled Martyrs for Mother Earth, the Promises and Pitfalls of Maternal Metaphors for Our Common Home, please welcome Dr. Elizabeth O'Donnell Gandolfo.
Good evening, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here with you tonight. I have long admired so many good folks here at Fordham, especially in the theology department and now the Catholic Studies program. And it's been very exciting for me to spend some time back on a Jesuit campus. As Dr. Lee mentioned, I went to St. Joe's in Philadelphia. The hawk will never die. I'm so grateful to Michael Lee and the Catholic Studies program for the invitation to visit, meet with students, and speak with all of you tonight. I'm also grateful to the Jones family for making this event possible, to Maria Terzulli for making all the arrangements for my visit, and most of all, I'm grateful to all of you for being here. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and old friends here tonight, and to make new connections with students, colleagues, and fellow travelers along the road to justice, peace, and ecological well-being. My remarks tonight revolve around ecological martyrs and how we can learn from their appeals to Mother Earth in the struggle for our common home. So I'd like to begin with a narrative litany of sorts to honor the women and men whose witnesses we are invoking tonight. Stories and litanies of saints and martyrs are such a beautiful element of Catholic spiritual and liturgical traditions around the world. They orient us to who we are as human beings and who we are called to be. And they invoke a cloud of witnesses to surround us and inspire us to participate in incarnating the divine dream of beloved community for humanity and creation as a whole. So I'm going to share with you a series of short vignettes, highlight the witness of women and men who have paid the ultimate price of their lives for their participation in this dream through their struggle for our common home in Latin America. I learned over 2 decades ago during my time living and working in El Salvador that a litany of martyrs in Latin America often includes the proclamation of presente upon calling the martyr's name. So as I proceed through this litany, I'll invite you to join me in that ritual response. Father Josimo Moraes Tavares was a Brazilian priest of African descent who was assassinated on May 10, 1986, because of his ministry of pastoral accompaniment and advocacy for the human rights of landless workers in a remote region of the Amazon rainforest. He was a poet and is remembered for his gentle demeanor, his love for dancing, playing soccer, playing the guitar, wearing tattered Hawaiian flip-flops, and listening to people tell their stories. Father Josimo lives on in the community's organizations and programs that bear his name and carry on his legacy in their pastoral work and socio-environmental projects such as agroforestry, medicinal herb gardens, bioconstruction, Creole seed houses, and diversification of food and energy production. Father Josimo Tavares, presente. Chico Mendes was a Brazilian rubber tapper, union organizer, and environmental activist who was assassinated on December 22nd, 1988 for his work fighting alongside his fellow rubber tappers and in solidarity with indigenous peoples against the deforestation, ecological degradation, and social devastation wrought by the incursion of highways, ranchers, and loggers in the Amazon rainforest. Chico lives on in the international environmental movement, in the struggle for climate justice, and in the bird that has been named for him, Chico's tyrannulet. As the popular Mexican rock group Maná puts it, he lives on in the rain that falls on the forest, in the tears of the angels who cry for all those whose lives have been stolen. Chico Mendes, presente. Father Alcides Jimenez Chicangana was a Colombian Catholic priest who was killed while celebrating the Eucharist on September 11, 1998, for his pastoral commitments to peace building, resisting fossil fuel extractivism, and promoting food sovereignty, which was threatened in the Putumayo region of Colombia by monocrop agriculture, particularly intensive cultivation of coca. He's remembered as a pastor who planted seeds of justice and ecological well-being in the lives of the people of his parish in Puerto Caicedo. Father Alcides lives on in the continued work of his people, in their community development projects, their radio stations, and in the seeds that he planted amongst them and in the earth. Father Alcides Jimenez, presente. Sister Dorothy Stang was a white Catholic woman from Ohio who was assassinated on February 12, 2005, after nearly 40 years in Brazil as a missionary engaged in pastoral ministry with ecclesial-based communities. With these communities, she worked for the promotion of sustainable agriculture and defense of human rights, especially land rights of small farmers who were being driven off their land in the Brazilian Amazon by loggers and ranchers. Sister Dorothy lives on in the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur and in the ecclesial-based communities of Anapu, where her loss is mourned deeply still, but her presence is felt in the local women's group that calls themselves Dorothy's Seeds, in the trees that the people of Anapu have planted to restore areas of the forest that have been destroyed, and in the newly documented Amazonian screech owl that bears her name. Sister Dorothy Stang, presente. Marcelo Rivera was a community organizer and water protector in the Department of Cabañas, El Salvador, who was tortured and murdered in June 2009 for his leadership of a concerted campaign to defend the communities and watersheds of El Salvador from gold mining, which is almost always accompanied by dire ecological and public health consequences. Marcelo lives on in his community's continued struggle for environmental justice and in the struggle of contemporary water protectors to reinstate the historic law banning all metallic mining throughout the country, which had been passed by the Salvadoran legislature or the Salvadoran Legislative Assembly in 2017 and was repealed just last December. Marcelo Rivera, presente. Berta Isabel Cáceres Flores was an indigenous leader in Honduras who was assassinated on March 2nd, 2016, for organizing amongst her Lencan people to protect the sacred waters of the Hualcarque River and the surrounding communities from social and ecological devastation by the internationally financed Agua Zarca hydroelectric dam project. Berta lives on in the work of the National Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras, COPIN, which she co-founded and directed, in her daughters who continue her struggle, and in her prophetic words shared across the world on YouTube videos, posters, murals, t-shirts, and more. In 2015, the year before she died, Berta was awarded the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize, and the words of her acceptance speech resound with urgency today. In our cosmovisions, we are beings who have emerged from the earth, from water and from corn. The Lenca people are ancestral custodians of rivers, which are further protected by the spirits of young girls, who teach us that to give our lives in multiple ways for the defense of the rivers is to give our lives for the good of humanity and this planet. Wake up, humanity. We are out of time. We must shake ourselves free of the rapacious capitalism, racism, and patriarchy that will only assure us self-destruction. The Hualcarque River has called upon us, as have all the rivers that are seriously threatened in our world. We must answer the call. Our Mother Earth, militarized, fenced in, poisoned, where basic rights are systematically violated, demands that we take action. Let us build, then, societies that are capable of coexisting in a way that is just, dignified, life-giving. Let us come together and move forward with hope as we defend and care for the blood of the earth and of its spirits. Berta concluded her speech by dedicating the award to all the rebels out there, to her mother, to the Lenca people, to Rio Blanco community, to Copin, and to the martyrs who have died defending the goods of the natural world. Berta Cáceres, presente. The martyrs to whom Berta dedicated her award are not few in number. The stories of Josimo, Chico, Alcides, Dorothy, Marcelo, and Berta that I just referenced in this litany were not isolated cases, even in their own local contexts. They're just the ones who have garnered the most international attention. Since the turn of the 21st century alone, though, thousands of environmental activists around the world have been assassinated for their work to protect the earth and its inhabitants from exploitation and destruction by profit-driven extractivist industries. The activism and legacy of slain environmental defenders is intimately tied to local lands and peoples, but the ecological and social movements to which they belong form international networks of activism and advocacy that are on the front lines of the global struggle against ecological destruction and climate breakdown. While no region of the globe has been entirely exempt from the phenomenon of these environmental killings, activists in the global south are by far at greatest risk, and certain regions of Latin America in particular have seen the lion's share of murders. Indigenous peoples are especially vulnerable. The witness of these land and environmental defenders, these ecological martyrs, reveals the logic and deadly consequences of an extractivist paradigm that embodies a way of being human and of relating to the earth that's designed to procure and protect power, wealth, comfort, and privilege for a small minority of the human population at the expense of the poor majorities and of the earth itself. In contradistinction to integral ecology, which we'll discuss in a moment, let's call this model extractivist ecology. In extractivist ecology, the material precarity and existential vulnerability of human existence is met in fear and acquisitiveness, with several conceptual and practical moves that actually end up exacerbating human vulnerability and precarity. First, for marginalized and oppressed human populations and the ecosystems on which they depend, but ultimately for all humanity and the planet as a whole. So first, extractivist ecology is characterized by a fearful mindset of scarcity that drives those with power to dominate, control, and possess the human and more than human world in order to stave off real and or perceived threats to survival and well-being, and ultimately to wealth, status, and or power. Ironically, despite the mindset of scarcity that sets this dynamic in motion, extractivism assumes that there are no limits to human plunder of the earth, that its resources are ours for the taking for the sake of our comfort and convenience with no end in sight. Furthermore, extractivist ecology justifies domination, control, and possession through the construction of hierarchies. More precisely, hierarchical dualisms, binaries that divorce or extract human beings from our bodies and from the more than human world from which we emerge, and on which our bodies depend for sustenance. These binaries place substances, persons, and values perceived to merit invulnerability in positions of dominance over and against substances, persons, and values perceived to embody the carnal vulnerability of corruptible flesh. Feminist and womanist scholars have been critiquing these hierarchical dualisms for decades now, often with an ecological lens. When the divine is perceived as over and above creation, spirit over matter, mind over body, male over female, white over black, and so on, all of the upper halves of these binaries are placed in positions of power to extract labor and resources from the lower elements, which are perceived to be naturally sinful and created for servitude. Ecofeminists have pointed out that imagining the earth in female terms, such as Mother Earth, for example, has actually served to establish and reinforce these hierarchies, subjecting both women and the less than human world and creation to the extractivist violence of patriarchal power. For millennia, women's bodies have been exploited for reproduction and domestic labor with little regard for their health, well-being, or human agency. Just as the earth has been exploited for the sake of resource accumulation and power. In other words, the earth has been treated like a mother. Eco-womanist scholars have reminded us that this connection between the extractivist plunder of the earth and of women is especially true of women of color, with chattel slavery in the United States has cited as a particularly egregious manifestation of how racialized gender violence and ecological degradation operate in tandem. While the witness of ecological martyrs reveals the violence of this extractivist paradigm, they and their communities are also witnesses to another way of being human and of relating to the earth that does not operate according to the logics of domination and control. I hesitate to categorize this way, or rather these ways, plural, of being human under one model or paradigm, because I know that there are a multitude of ways in which human beings relate to the earth and imagine, conceptualize, experience, and organize human and ecological well-being. In fact, environmental defenders drink from many well springs and are inspired, motivated, and guided by a wide diversity of religious, spiritual, philosophical, cultural, and ecological traditions. In the Americas, these include, but are not limited to, indigenous cosmovisions and practices of reciprocity with the more than human world, African heritage religions that honor the life forces or energies that manifest in the sacred powers of the natural world, and Catholic traditions of liberation theology and the preferential option for the poor, as well as creation spirituality and the new cosmology. I don't want to reduce any of these traditions to a common denominator or erase their beautiful differences. And if we had more time, we could get into each of them individually and still not even scratch the surface. They contain multitudes within each of them. But I venture to say that Pope Francis's paradigm of integral ecology offers a capacious and flexible enough framework that seems to get at some of the key characteristics of many of these well springs and the diverse ways in which environmental defenders are conceptualizing and embodying alternative ways of being human in relationship to the vulnerability and the beauty of life in this world. Pope Francis roots his own integral ecology in the Christian doctrine of creation, of course, but integral ecology as a whole and each of these dimensions of it could be elaborated, extended, corrected, and embodied in conversation with other religious, spiritual, philosophical, even scientific communities as well. But broadly speaking, integral ecology describes a way of being human that recognizes and lives into the interdependence of all things and the interconnections between social, political, economic, spiritual, cultural, and ecological well-being. It's all interconnected. In contradistinction to extractivist ecology, integral ecology responds to the precarities and vulnerabilities of human existence, not in fear, but in hope and with courage, peace, and compassion. Let's just take a closer look quickly before turning to Mother Earth. First, integral ecology is a paradigm for being human that sees the world in terms of sacred abundance rather than scarcity, and seeks to share and communally care for the Earth's abundance for the sake of meeting both human needs and the needs of creation as a whole. This affirmation of gracious abundance does not deny human vulnerability or the vulnerability and finitude of creation, but rather recognizes that the gracious gift of creation must be tilled and kept carefully, gratefully, and communally in order to distribute the goods of this gift justly and maintain it for generations to come. Environmental defenders both resist the ways in which extractivism violates the Earth's abundance and create alternative communities of solidarity with one another and creation, seeking ways of honoring and caring for the interdependence of human and ecological needs. Furthermore, integral ecology is a paradigm for being human that sees all things as interconnected and refuses to fearfully extract or divide one element or dimension of existence from the others. Well, we'll talk in a moment about how I think Pope Francis had some more work to do in this area, and the Catholic tradition has more work to do in this area, particularly in the realm of gender and sexuality, along with race. Integral ecology has the potential to deconstruct the hierarchical dualisms of the Western Christian tradition, the Western Christian patriarchal tradition, and the Western tradition of capitalist extractivism. Environmental defenders seek paths of interdependence and interconnection that explicitly and or implicitly overcome many of these binaries and embody a more holistic and egalitarian vision of human existence, even in the face of vulnerability, conflict, and violence. And then finally, integral ecology is a paradigm for being human that eschews violence and seeks creative and nonviolent paths of resistance and alternative living. While most would also admit that armed self-defense is sometimes necessary and entirely justified, worldviews that see all life as sacred and interconnected are fundamentally invested in the preservation of life and the promotion of peaceful coexistence. Most environmental defenders have seen enough violence in their context to know, both strategically and spiritually, that violent conflict ends up harming the earth and vulnerable communities more than anyone else. Furthermore, environmental defenders know firsthand the power of creative forms of resistance that reimagine and re-embody the world in both everyday life and in larger struggles for social and environmental justice. In the words of Rita Cassela, you have the bullet, I have the word. The bullet dies when it explodes. The word lives on when it is replicated. Some of the words that live on in both the ecological martyrs legacy and that are employed in Catholic discourse on integral ecology are words that describe the earth using maternal metaphors. In the very first paragraph of Laudato Si, Pope Francis cites St. Francis's Canticle of the Creatures to reflect that, quote, our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. And then quoting Pope St. Francis, praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs, end quote. Later on, he reinforces these familial metaphors in his reflections on the interconnectedness of all things. He says, everything is related, and we human beings are united as brothers and sisters on a wonderful pilgrimage, woven together by the love God has for each of his creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with brother sun, sister moon, brother river, and mother earth, end quote. While the embrace of maternal metaphor for the earth here offers a beautifully interrelational alternative to the violence of extractivist ecology, there is some reason it makes me and other feminist theologians pretty nervous. And so I think we should place this ecological metaphor in conversation with the larger Catholic approach to motherhood, along with feminist critiques of it. Catholic ethicist Nicole Flores reminds us that even though this metaphor has its strengths, particularly with regards to cultivating ecological solidarity in Catholic social teaching, this same metaphor, quote, risks obscuring important concerns about familial and gender justice, especially as they concern the enduring issues of inequality within families, including gender inequality in Catholic social teaching, end quote. While acknowledging the particular strengths of the familial metaphor within Latin American and Latinx contexts, she also warns us that in the drama of creation envisioned by St. Francis, our sister Mother Earth is, quote, cast as the feminine victim, groaning in pain from abuse and exploitation. At the same time, the church's magisterium is cast as the father, a paterfamilias responsible for the direction of the family. Buying into a gender binary inscribed by modernity's drive to divide, define, and conquer, the salvation of the earthly, bodily feminine remains dependent on masculine governance, reinforcing a pattern of gender inequality firmly ensconced in Catholic social thought, end quote. The argument that Flores puts forth here is strengthened by her engagement with ecofeminist theologian Ivone Guevara's critiques of the idolatrous gender constructions in which women are socialized to sacrifice themselves and, quote, comply with the wants, needs, and desires of men who stand in God's place as their telos, Motherhood is central to this dynamic, given that the Roman Catholic Church views women as having a vocation to spiritual or material motherhood. And in this conception of motherhood, self-sacrifice is central. In a general audience at the beginning of 2015, the same year he released Laudato Si, Pope Francis extolled the self-sacrificing virtues of motherhood as a spiritual antidote to selfish individualism. Quoting Salvadoran martyr, Archbishop Oscar Romero, he declared that a mother's daily choice to give life is a form of martyrdom. In Romero's words, quote, "To give up life, to have the spirit of martyrdom is to give it up in duty, in silence, in prayer, in the honest fulfillment of duty, in the silence of daily life. To give up life little by little, yes, that's how a mother does it, fearlessly with the simplicity of maternal martyrdom." End of Romero quote. Here we are, back at square one, where the essence of woman/mother is fulfilled by giving up her own life in the daily fulfillment of a duty that has been defined by a patriarchal institution, and where by extension, by logical extension, the earth, conceived of as mother, is expected to do the same for her human children. Surely this is not Francis's intention in using the maternal metaphor for our common home. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt there, given his ecological commitments and his admonishments to the rest of us. But this is where the logic leads. Women, or woman, as mother, is romantically defined by her service to and sacrifice to her family and community. The earth as mother is a passive provisioner, defined by the romanticized abundance, again, that she produces to meet the needs of humanity. Christina Lito Gomez's work on maternal metaphors for the church and creation deepens this critique even further. In her argument that the Catholic hierarchy's teaching on women and motherhood is rooted in an infantile projection of romanticized motherhood onto all women by celibate men whose experience with mothers is primarily shaped by childhood attachments to an idealized primary caregiver. And yet, Lito Gomez does not wish to do away with maternal metaphors altogether. In fact, she's worried about feminist theology doing away with any reference to motherhood. Rather, she seeks to, quote, reclaim mother language by calling for the reimagination of motherhood as reality rather than concept, a respect for women who are mothers in their diversity and complexity, end quote. She draws on indigenous practices of honoring Mother Earth to reimagine a relationship with creation that decolonizes this romanticized mother figure and recognizes the complexity and ambiguity of women, mothers, and the earth itself. At the same time, she hopes that recovery of respect for women in their power to birth, along with recovery of respect for Mother Earth, might be the very thing that can initiate the healing this world desperately needs. Many of the eco-martyrs whom we called on in our opening litany also advocate this recovery of respect for Mother Earth. And like Lito Gomez's constructive engagement with indigenous voices on motherhood, I think these witnesses can help us learn to correct our tendencies to essentialize, romanticize, and thereby exploit and sacrifice women and the earth on the pedestal of what the church has called our feminine genius. I'll start down this path, though, by noting that these land and environmental defenders and their communities do not only refer to Earth as mother. And there is much regional, cultural, and religious variation and nuance in their uses of maternal metaphors for our common home. I feel like that's a constant disclaimer in any scholarly work, right? But so perhaps, like what I just said, these disclaimers, these are actually the first two lessons that we should learn from eco-martyrs' use of Mother Earth language. Like human mothers, the earth is not only a mother, and being a mother means more than one thing. While mothering is central to the identity and fulfillment of many women who mother, myself included, there is more to us than one thing. Rita Casela's speech points to this in her reference to how the Lincoln Cosmovision honors the earth not as an abstract, romanticized whole, but in terms of its many complex and concrete constituent parts. Its waters, its lands, its corn, its natural elements, its blood, and even its spirits. Berta herself was a mother, yet she is remembered all around the world, not for giving birth or feeding her children, but rather for standing up to transnational banks and corporations to protect the lands and waterways to which her people belong. She was also a mother, but so much more. I'll say it again. Human mothers and Mother Earth are not only mothers, we're more than one thing. Even this one thing, though, mothering, is more than one thing. It's super complex, confusing, chaotic, conflictual, and ambiguous. I have 3 teenagers and an adolescent right behind them. It's chaos. It's not only life-giving and creative, though most certainly it can be that. It can also be damaging and destructive. For example, the maternal human body often rejects the life growing inside of itself, with at least 10 to 20% of pregnancies ending in a miscarriage. Or pregnancy can destroy the life of the mother herself. Furthermore, mothers are human beings who are finite and limited in our abilities to successfully protect, nurture, and guide our children into a happy and healthy adulthood. Similarly, the earth is complex, confusing, chaotic, conflictual, and ambiguous. It produces awesome, beautiful abundance and devastating destruction. We should also always remember that Mother Earth is a metaphor and does not imply consciousness, agency, or intentionality on the part of the earth. But Berta's speech implies that the earth is not only passively crying out, as Leonardo da Vinci or Pope Francis characterized her in the phrase cry of the earth, cry of the poor. Rather, she is demanding that we take action. Nos exige actuar are the words that she uses in the Spanish speech. If we are going to think of the earth as mother, let's think of her like the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, who actively and prophetically demanded justice for their disappeared children. Honoring Mother Earth means acting in solidarity with her to demand justice for her disappeared children, both human and more than human. This leads to a third lesson I think we can take away from eco-martyrs' use of maternal metaphors for our common home. To appeal to the language of Mother Earth in our ecological rhetoric without action for environmental justice and ecological well-being will simply lead to the kind of extractivism via idealization that we talked about earlier. Sister Dorothy Stang, for example, wrote home from Brazil to her sisters in the United States that we must help the people recapture a relationship with Mother Earth that is tender and kind. We must make great efforts to save our planet. Earth is not able to provide anymore. Her water and air are poisoned, and her soil is dying of exaggerated use of chemicals. This does echo that rhetoric of kind of the passive victim. But given her lifelong active engagement with the earth, the reciprocity of that relationship, and her commitment to justice and ecological well-being for the Amazon and its people, they weren't hollow romantic words for Dorothy, but rather a call to repair that relationship of mutuality and reciprocity that has been broken by violence and injustice over the course of centuries of colonial and post-colonial rule. Related to all three of these first 3 lessons is another insight, that the understanding we develop and the action we take in solidarity with Mother Earth requires reciprocal relationship in which we get to know her and love her and commune with the divine in her in very contemplative and intimate ways. For example, Father Alcides' spirituality was intimately reciprocal in its relationality with the more than human world, and likely had indigenous influences from the region in which he was born and raised. He was known to celebrate Mass in the forest, surrounded by trees, which he encouraged congregants to meet as friends and offer the greeting, "Peace be with you." A rare recording of Father Alcide celebrating Mass in the forest illuminates the spirituality further. In the recording, he proclaims, "This earth is like our mother, who gave birth to us one day. This earth covers us with the fraternity of her leaves, the trees, the rocks, and this little trickle of water." Even his Eucharistic spirituality was deeply integrated with his appreciation for the presence of God in the everyday elements of life experienced in the abundance of creation. This is another quote from that Mass. "Today, Jesus Christ comes to this mountain as he liked to do, and he mingles with us and walks here, and he brings us together so we can share today." This whole list of Colombian typical foods and drinks: las yotas, la chicha, el guarapo, friendship, some sweets, un sancochi. This chalice represents the chicha of the indigenous, of the campesinos. It's the chicha of friendship and of love, end quote. For Father Alcides, the altar could be found anywhere that you could celebrate the presence of Christ, including in Mother Earth. He was a priest who recognized and celebrated Christ's presence not only in the four walls of a church building, but in the forests and fields, amid the reality of the natural world and the people. While most Catholic eco-theologies would not ascribe divinity to the earth itself, in and of itself, a sacramental imagination like that of Father Alcides meets Mother Earth with confidence that the cosmic Christ, who is also the crucified Christ, is intimately present in her. The final lesson that I have gleaned for us to learn from environmental defenders' appeals to Mother Earth lies in the fact that their work for social justice and ecological well-being often involves reimagining gender roles and deconstructing gender inequalities that mark patriarchal institutions of motherhood. Many of the eco-martyrs whose stories we've witnessed tonight, including Father Alcides, have advocated for gender justice in the daily life practice of their communities. For example, in Berta's organization, COPIN, women have played a pivotal role in organizing communal resistance to extractivist projects, have been spiritual leaders connecting the community to their ancestral traditions, and have made reorganizing the relationship between men and women in the community a priority in their day-to-day activities. Even something as simple as the men preparing and cleaning up after a meal is a real material change that resists the patriarchal association of women exclusively with caregiving, domestic labor, and tending to the basic needs of bodies. Berta insisted, and COPIN continues to hold today, that the future of this planet, Mother Earth, depends on resistance to not only the extractivist industries of rapacious capitalism, but also the violence and extractivist logics baked into the colonial systems of racism and patriarchy. I don't think we can truly honor Mother Earth well without reimagining and reorganizing how we distribute power, authority, and caregiving labor in our families, in our communities, in our politics and economics, and yes, in our religious communities and the church as a whole. The perils of appealing to maternal metaphors for our common home are many. I haven't even had a chance to talk about all of them tonight. But the greatest risk when we use this language in the Catholic tradition is reinscribing those stereotypical gender roles that have contributed to the degradation of creation in the first place. There are powerful people in this world who would love to put women back in our places and extract every last bit of the earth's riches for their own personal gains. We should certainly be wary of using language that might facilitate such nefarious purposes. But I think we can learn from these martyrs and from Indigenous peoples and land defenders, environmental defenders around the world, that there are healthier, more life-giving ways to relate to one another and to the earth as our mother. I think the promises of reimagining and re-embodying these relationships of interdependence, mutuality, and reciprocity outweigh the perils Indeed, the future of life on our planet depends on it. So let's wake up and heed Bertha's call. Our Mother Earth, militarized, fenced in, poisoned, where basic rights are systematically violated, demands that we take action. Nos exige actuar. We must wake up, for we are truly running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a rich presentation. So we do have time for some questions. We should have a microphone or two floating around the room. Yes. So if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you and can ask away.
Y'all are a lot quieter than the students in Dr. Lee's class this morning.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. You chose to end with Our Mother Earth, quoting Rita Cassela, after deconstructing the use of a mothering language or motherhood language, or both. Maybe this is less of a question, more of a comment. In my work with indigenous healers, when we go to the forests, I don't recall ever the person I work with speaking about Mother Earth, but certainly the spirit. And I think something that you mentioned at the heart of the presentation was that it's about relationships.
Yeah.
And someone like Berta Cáceres is certainly speaking with the river, listening to what the
Yes.
river is communicating, being able to do that translation work. It's not primarily maybe dealing with like Mother Earth, but with all of the interrelated spirits, for lack of a better word, but spiritual beings that reside therein. So if I think about Mother Earth and that category and relationship, to break out of the dyad is like Father Earth, Mother Earth, and this about relationality that seems to point to that we've perhaps utterly lost, and that this only makes sense if you contextualize a relationship.
Yeah. I think that's why I trust Berta so much in her use of this language of Mother Earth, because of the way in which it's not just this abstract romanticized entity, right, that we relate to, even if it's personally, but kind of not at, the everydayness of relationality with the more than human world. And so, I think especially, I'm going to think this through on the fly. So we'll see how it goes, but the inspiritedness of the world for Berta and the Lincoln cosmovision that, the river is speaking to, there are spirits that are, protecting the river. Everything is alive. Everything has spirit. Everything can be related to. It's like this, like I said earlier, this mother is more than just this abstract thing out there, right? There's this complexity and diversity and chaos and relationality to it. And in the way that she and many other of the land and environmental defenders that are featured here relate to those elements of creation, those waterways and trees and rocks and, different sacred sites is very different, is far more concrete and reciprocal and more like what I would want to be related to as, a maternal figure in my life, and then more than maternal figure in my life. That there's so much particularity and aliveness that we should engage that is just flattened and reduced in this kind of romanticized understanding. Does that make sense?
Hello, thank you. That was a great talk. I was wondering if you know if this kind of metaphor like kind of increased as like climate change got worse? Like, do you think that it's like prevalence it's been used more, or like if it was kind of always the thing, even when climate change wasn't as bad?
Well, I think it's always, I don't know if always is the right word, but it's a metaphor that's been used in many cultures and in many times and places in many, many different ways for tens of thousands of years, right? It goes back to, pre-monotheistic traditions. And so it's always been there, right? I think there's more public attention to it because there's more public attention to the earth. And also, like, where I would keep seeing it come up is in kind of the appeals of Indigenous peoples to take heed and to honor Mother Earth. And those voices, which have so long been silenced around the world, especially in the Americas, are, gaining a platform and are, able to be heard and are being amplified more. So that's a way in which I think it has been more prevalent than, in years past. But it's an ancient, deep tradition, or traditions plural, that kind of are underneath it. But there's also, one of the other problems or perils, I don't even remember what I called the talk, pitfalls, is the way in which you like see this rise in greenwashing of like commercial products, right? Mother Earth is everywhere. Like, there's Mother Earth Brewing Company. I remember when I first started doing research to this is just kind of the seed of a larger project that one day I hope to expand further. When I first started doing research for it, I needed a bag to carry all my books from the library. And I was in the dollar store to get something for my kids. And there was like a reusable bag there. And not that I don't have too many of those already in my closet at home, but I needed one to be carried up to school that day or something. And it said, "Mother Earth thanks you" on the bag. And I thought, oh my God, how ironic that here I am purchasing this thing at the dollar store that, says Mother Earth on it. So all kinds of products and campaigns and, it's used in ways that are really co-opted and problematic commercially, for profit and gain. That certainly has increased, right? But yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering, do you think there is a way that like we specifically as like students of an institution can take like physical action where we are now to help this issue, to help like decentralize the idea of this, like these metaphors that are harmful?
What as an institution? I couldn't quite hear your first.
That like we as like specifically students.
I think there, in order to rethink and re-employ or recover these metaphors, I think that you're studying. That's what you're here to do, is to rethink the way you use language. And so paying close attention to gendered language in anything you read, for example, is a place to start, As you're hearing the church called mother or she, or the earth called mother or she, like, what does that mean? What do they really mean by that? Like, dig deeper, use critical thinking, and, don't just accept all of that at face value. And that's what you're here for in a good liberal arts education. It's to think about how we know what we know, why we think we know that, and how do we, serve society better by, critically engaging with these things and, for a new generation, recovering what we need to recover and deconstructing what we need to deconstruct. So that's the work that you're doing as students. Absolutely. I think language is so powerful. Like, we don't, like, what can I do? Like, concretely, that's also a really important, question, but how do we use our language, and what values do we attach to it? Conscious of.
Thank you, Dr. Gandolfo. That sets up my question very nicely. I have a question about language.
Oh, there.
Sorry. So, one of the things that your talk kind of allowed me to build are these parallels, right? And I'm looking at this quote from Berta, and I'm seeing there's no agent, right? Like, who is militarizing the earth? Who is poisoning the earth? And I'm thinking about this agentless phrase of violence against women as well. And I'm just wondering, and there's like very real damage that can be ascribed to what you said of like, oh, well, we'll start thinking about the earth as having a consciousness or having agency, and then we can kind of write off a lot of stuff because she'll heal herself or whatever. How do you have a recommendation for restructuring our language in such a way that names the agent who is doing the harm?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that why these land and environmental defenders are being killed is because they're naming the agents. They're saying this corporation, this bank, this political figure, this corrupt mayor, this law enforcement, like actually saying it's not just a generalized defense of the earth. And so the kinds of work that they are involved in doing, and that the eco martyrs were involved in doing, is doing precisely what you're talking about. I couldn't even follow it. I'm a theologian, like the layers of complexity in like the various networks of power and who has that agency that's actually going in there, building the dams or, extracting the rare earth minerals or like illegal gold mining in the Amazon is huge now. So like, who's the agent there? It's kind of ordinary people who need to go in and like make a living for themselves. But when the land and environmental defenders stand up against that, there's this whole array of like networked power from the very top down to the hitman who's hired to do the job, who's doing the violating, right? And so they're doing that. I wish I could like pull up a clip of Rita Cassela's, naming that specifically, but that's exactly the work that she was doing. And so I think what happens to us in theology, though, is that many of those things become abstract or generalized, and so, or that we can name those things, probably the better. Yeah.
We have just about reached our time. In fact, Professor Gandolfo will hang around a little bit while, so if you have a question you'd like to approach her. But I think the most important thing we can do at this point is thank her for her wonderful testimony.
Thank you.
Of course, it wouldn't be the end of a Catholic event if we didn't have some announcements. Just to say that next week, September 29th, we will have the opening lecture of our Fordham Reads Dante series. Francesco Ciavatoni, you think he knows something about Italian literature? A professor from Georgetown will be presenting on Dante's Divine Comedy from Gregorian chant to pop songs. So music will be performed. And next month, October 6th, we're commemorating the birth centenary of John McNeill, a pioneer of Catholic LGBTQ ministry. We'll be screening a documentary on his life, Taking a Chance on God, which will be followed by a panel discussion including Brendan Fay, the filmmaker, Mary Hunt, our own Jason Steidel-Jack, a Ph.D. grad from here, and it'll be moderated by our own Father Brian Massengill. The Dante event will be upstairs, and the film and panel will be at McNally Auditorium at our Lincoln Center campus. So the last thanks that I can give are to all of you. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Jones family, you're here.